So, Frank, thanks for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm very good. What I do with every guest that comes on, it doesn't matter what path you've been on or what walk of life you've been on, is take it right back to the start.
Sure.
Especially with musicians and bands. I know you might get this question a lot, but I love to know the first album you bought with your pocket money or was given that made you basically fall in love with music.
For me, it was a record called "Killers" by Iron Maiden.
Amazing.
Um, my folks, I was about 10 years old. My folks listened to, and indeed, my mum plays music, but it's classical music and church music, and they don't really believe in drum kits and electrification and stuff like that. And I was about 10, and I saw an Iron Maiden poster, and I thought it was cool, and I told my dad about it, and he got me a cassette from the R Price at Waterloo Station when
Ah,
they
our
still had
price.
record stores at train stations. Yeah, and it changed my life. Just it was very much a kind of light switch moment for me.
And then it all changed for, I think we're the same age. I'm 42.
Yes, 42. Yeah.
Yes, so one of my first ever gigs was Green Day at the Wolverhampton Wolfram Hall.
Oh, the Wolfen, lovely.
What a great place. But to see Green Day on the Dookie tour, I think it was mind blowing. I was wondering what your introduction to live music was, because I think it stays with you forever, doesn't it, that first show?
It does. So
Is it
basically,
embarrassing?
yeah, no, well, no. It's just there's a sort of sidebar here. Essentially, so my mum was sort of horrified by my newfound interest in metal. Not least, I brought home a copy of I think it was Kerrang magazine that had a feature on Cannibal Corpse in it, and she
Wow.
was just like, no. So I was sort of banned from buying music magazines, listening to records, going to shows, all that kind of stuff. I did that all sort of in secret, as it were. Not it felt like forever at the time, but sort of when I do the maths on it, it was probably for about a year or something. You know what I mean? But my time of oppression, man. Anyway, but my mum was very opposed to me going to shows for a long time, and I think that she thought that shows were, bikers injecting each other with heroin in the
Satan
dark.
worshipping, yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? And I have been to gigs like that actually. So there was a band. My mum had a friend whose son was in a band called Snug. Don't know if you remember Snug.
I remember the name, but I don't remember. I can't picture them or hear them in
They
my head.
they were a sort of kind of. I mean, I don't mean to be rude to them because I enjoyed their music, but they were a sort of like Ash kind of territory band.
Yep.
A Symposium, that sort of scene of kind of power pop punk,
Yeah.
but not the Californian version of that. Anyway, they were playing at the Joiners Arms in Southampton, which was down the way, and because my mum's friend's son was the singer in this band, my mum could sort of see a way to allowing me to go to this show. So off I went with a couple of friends. And my memory is it was great and perfect in every way. And I seem to remember that we pogoed all the way through the support bands and the between bands music.
That's incredible.
Probably to the vast annoyance of everybody around us. But yeah, it was a life changing event.
I've followed your career from, I think it's over 20 years. I remember being at uni and I saw you in Leicester at the Charlotte, and I think I mentioned just before we hit record today with Million Dead. I believe the scene was absolutely untouchable back then. You had Hellas for Heroes, 100 Reasons, Million Dead, Ruben, Biffy Clyro.
McCluskey as the one I was.
Unbelievable. Just
Yeah.
Cave In, all these incredible bands that came through. Does it seem an absolute lifetime ago that you were involved in such a great scene? Because for me, it's university days. It feels like it was only 10 years ago, but then someone remind me it's 25 years since this
Yeah,
album came out, and I'm like,
yeah.
fuck off, you know?
No, I know what you mean. It is like time relentlessly marches forward.
Oh, God.
It does feel like a different lifetime in many ways, and one of the things, again, talking about the kind of telescoping nature of time, is that for example, I was briefly in a band called Knee Jerk before I was in Million Dead, and those two events feel separated, very separate in my head, or at least they did until kind of just the other day. I realized that they were like 2 years apart from each other, and the whole thing's now 20 years ago, and that they're much more of a piece than anything to do with my life now, if you see
Yeah.
what I mean. And it's like, oh, okay, that's weird, it was an interesting time. It was a slightly strange time in the sense that there sort of was a community in the bands, and there wasn't. I've stayed friends with the Biffy guys since then, for sure. And I was chatting with Jamie Lemon just the other day, actually, funnily enough. But it's like it was an odd moment. Like Million Dead, I was listening back to Million Dead the other day. Me and Ben, the drummer, are still friends, and we got pissed, and our wives kind of left us to it as we reminisced. And listening back at the time, as much as we liked bands like Funeral for a Friend, Hell is for Heroes, and 100 Reasons, that particular sort of triumvirate, like we liked those people and we respected their music and liked their music, but we didn't feel like we had anything in common with them musically at all in terms of our influences or our intentions. And and again, there's no part of me that's denigrating those bands and saying that.
No,
It sort of felt like we were just trying to do pretty different things actually. And there have been times when I wonder whether that sentiment, it was kind of youthful braggadocio, and that actually we were. But actually, listening back to Million Dead the other day, I was like, nah, man, we were fucking weird. Do you know what I mean? Like, we were a strange band. I'm not saying we were the best band by any stretch of the imagination, but we were quite odd. We didn't really fit with that. Um, we didn't have the kind of power chord choruses. Do you know what I
no,
mean?
that's fair.
And we were kind of chasing like Hot Snakes and Fugazi, and of course at the drive-in. Let's not
That's the
forget.
band that always comes to my head is At the Drive-In. I kind of
Yeah,
feel the
which I think
same
is
riffs and the same power tones and the
yeah,
guitar tones.
yeah. But it's like, I mean, I think one of our kind of secret weapons, Cameron, our guitarist, was much more interested in stuff like D4 and that kind of slightly scuzzy rock and roll sort of
Yeah,
thing. Which, in fairness, at the time, I wasn't that into. But it sort of it gives what we did sort of this just slightly left field flavor. So, but I mean, obviously, many more people care about most of the other bands in that scene cared about Million Dead. So maybe it was to our detriment.
with everything at the moment, there seems to be anniversary shows for albums, and there's a lot of bands doing 20th anniversaries. Would you ever pick up the mic for Million Dead and do it again? Because I feel like it's so past where you are now and so different. I
Sure.
don't know if you'd feel like I can't get in the mindset for these songs anymore. I can't do it.
Yeah, it's well. To be honest, the challenge would be as much physical in the sense that I sang right at the top of my range back then, and I cannot hit some of the notes that I sang a minute ago. We'd have to detune some guitars pretty heavily. But for the longest time, my answer to that question has been fuck no.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like straight up, fuck no, never going to happen. And I'm not saying it is going to happen, but I did sort of when I was hanging out with Ben the other day, it was sort of nice to realize that the things that any of us were fucked off with each other about are now so far in the past that it's almost laughable. Do you know what I mean? I almost can't quite remember what it was I was annoyed about.
isn't that lovely though? Isn't it that it's I may have taken 2 decades and now lots of drinks to realize and kind of life goes on, but all those issues, even for me, then I wasn't in bands that were successful. We did a few shows at the Charlotte and stuff, but the problems that were between us now just aren't important. They really aren't.
Yeah, and it is a lovely thing. Yeah, it's that sort of realization that, I mean, the insert cliche here, but like time heals wounds,
Yeah.
and just stuff kind of it doesn't matter, and like after a certain amount of time. I mean, it's not something that's on my immediate to-do list. I think this is the other thing about it that would be slightly weird is, perhaps in a good way, is that like um, and I want to say this with all the due respect for anybody else who might be tangential to this conversation, but like I don't need to do it
No.
myself because what I do as a solo artist has been more successful than me and Dev was, which means that my motivation to do it would be purely musical and artistic rather than like Christ, I need a fucking payday, the mortgage is
Of
coming back,
course.
whatever.
Yeah.
And I actually quite like that fact. Do you know what I mean? It means that if it were ever to happen, it would be for the right reasons. Not again that I'm trying to cuss
No,
anybody out.
I've been in the crowd to many reunion shows, and you can see there's somebody got a legal or tax bill, and you think it's transparent. I've been to shows where I've just gone, these guys are just going through the motions. You can see they're not even
Sure.
talking, and it's
Yeah.
like I'd rather you just have left it as it was.
Totally. The flip side of that for me, and like, but then this brings up another thing. Like, so, I mean, my hardcore kind of like trump card is that I saw Refused in '98.
Yeah,
But I also saw the first round of reunion shows they did, and I was like, you know what? Hats off to you guys. You changed the genre. You broke up. You didn't get any of the kind of credit. You didn't get your victory lap, and you kind of deserve one. And I was happy for them to kind of like, you
yeah.
know, do that. And then they announced they were doing a new album, and I was like, no, what?
Yeah.
And like, I haven't personally been a huge fan of the new material that they've done. But I didn't resent them that initial reunion tour. I was like, fuck it, man.
No, I
They've
was there. I saw them in Birmingham on that tour, and Dennis was like, like I remember him back in the day, and he was still swinging the mic and singing, and they
Yeah,
had the
and they
energy.
were they were transcendent. They were amazing, and sort of claiming their crown in a way that they felt they
Yeah,
were. So I mentioned that. I mean, like I saw the other day, like 100 Reasons going out and kind of doing Brixton again, and I just thought it was so cool because slight tangent here, but like every single person in the band at some point, particularly when their career is sort of on the upslope, kind of gives the interview. They go, I mean, the success isn't all that important to me, and I keep doing it regardless. And it's just like I call bullshit on that
of
statement
course.
because it's really easy to say when everything's still kind of going well and increasing in size and all the rest of it. And it's like, would you really go back to playing the Barfly after you've headlined Brixton Academy? And here's the thing: 100 Reasons did.
Yep.
I saw them at the Barfly 7 years after they'd headlined Brixton, and then they went back and headlined Brixton again. And fucking hats off to that. I think they've earned the right to kind of slightly strut about that. Do you know what I mean? They really did it, and I think that's admirable.
I love the fact that now we're sitting here and we're on the verge of you releasing album number 10. That blows my mind. It does. It never seem like that. But I know it's
Sure.
hard to kind of have this huge trip down memory lane today, but did you ever think when you started that solo career and those ideas of putting pen to paper and thinking, I'm going to go under my own name, you'd be sat here doing album number 10 with all the success of touring the world and being where you are? Or did you just throw your hat into the mix and think, I'll see what happens?
I think. I mean, it would be insane to say that I expected it, and I mean, sort of would be an odd thing to say, but like, of course. I mean, did I sort of secretly hope and dream that it might go well, whatever that might look like? Yeah, of course. I had ambitions to continue being a musician
Yeah,
over time. I mean, I at the same time, I mean, the funny thing about that particular moment in my life, the sort of transitional moment from Million Dead to the solo thing, is that at the time I just sort of felt I knew what I was doing, and in this way that feels quite sort of artistically integral. I was just like, I have these songs, I'm going to play these songs. Loads of people I knew thought I was having some kind of psychotic episode. They're not claiming any sort of enormous precedence here, but like the path from a punk or hardcore or post-hardcore band to making solo acoustic music was much less clear at
yeah,
that point in music history. Jonah Matranga existed, Chuck Ragan and Tim Barry were starting to put out records, but there was a moment later where it was sort of became the thing that the singer would, from any given band, would do a solo record or whatever. And so, I remember telling people, "Oh, I'm going to do folk music or my version of folk music," and people were just like, "Are you okay?" Like,
Do you need to
um,
see a doctor?
yeah, do you know what I mean? Do you want to talk to someone, kind of thing? And like, so everyone thought I was nuts, and I thought I had a plan. And the funny thing is that now, looking back, everybody thinks I must have had a plan, and I kind of think I must have been slightly nuts because I sort of find it quite difficult to think my way back into that mindset. But there was a certain kind of like sort of sleepwalkerness to it. Do you know what I mean? It was just kind of like, I mean, and part of that was because I was really gutted when Million Dead broke up, and I just was sort of wanted to keep going. I mean, ironically, about 6 months before Million Dead broke up, I moved out the shared house I was living in Finsbury Park and like sold all my shit and was like, I'm just going to be on tour forever. And that's when I went out and did crewing for Ruben, is because Million Dead didn't tour enough to sustain that. So I was going out with other bands and stuff, and then Million Dead broke up, and it was like, fuck.
Yeah,
And it's quite easy to book solo shows, and at the beginning my fee was 50 quid, and that went up to 50 quid plus train fare when my young person's rail card ran out. And I would book my life about 6 weeks ahead, and just did 2 or 3 years doing that. And so there was a kind of logistic momentum to it, let's say. But yeah, I just kind of did it in this way that makes me. I kind of look back, and I'm kind of like, wow, go you, 23-year-old me. Like, fuck, that's a thing. So
the thing is with you, and I put you in the same kind of ballpark as Biffy Clyro. No one can ever take away from you the amount of work you've done. So I remember back in the day when I'd buy Kerrang magazine to find out about gigs because you wouldn't be on Instagram and Twitter and all this.
sure,
And the Biffy Clyro page would be half of the page of their advert because they were doing 200 shows, on a
yeah, yeah,
tour
yeah,
for
sure.
Infinity Land and stuff. And I was thinking, fair play to them. The reason they're headlining Download now is because they put the graft in. They went and played every show they ever could. They did the shitholes with 10 people, but then now they can play arenas. And I genuinely think you've done the same. The fact that we're here and you're nearly at your 3,000th show,
Yeah.
you don't come that far doing the shed in Leicester 3,000 times. You do it
Yeah.
because you evolve and you want to get bigger and you want
Well,
to, you know,
hopefully, let's say. I
yeah,
mean, I thank you. That's kind of you to say. I mean, it is a funny thing that, like, I am sort of aware that the whole show counting thing is like. I mean, I started doing it because at the beginning it was just me, and
yeah,
there's nobody I can call and be like, "Hey, what did we do in 2006?" Because I mean, obviously there are people I know from Tin and being an example, but like,
yeah.
there's no constancy of kind of there's no body of people who did the whole thing. It was just me. But I'm aware that there's, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just a number ticking over, and there's a degree of bravado. But most of all, that like quality and quantity are not interchangeable concepts. And like a few years ago, I was at the Independent Music Awards, and they gave me an award for hardest working artist, which was very nice. And then shortly afterwards, they gave me an award for best live act, and I was like, I'm really relieved I got the second one because it's sort of one could be the hardest working artist and still be awful. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's at least hypothetically possible. I mean, I like to think that after this many shows that I've sort of developed some aptitude.
As they give you the trophy for the hardest work, and they're like, "You'll get there eventually, Frank. Keep
Yeah,
going."
do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? It's like, yeah,
yeah.
there's a, like, it's, I mean, I'm, well, I'm not going to look at award horse, is that a thing, in the mouth? But yeah, getting the kind of the quality as well as quantity
The
still.
Won't Quit Award 2024.
Yeah, right. They're like, he still hasn't fucking gone away a little
Yeah.
bit. Like, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that that would actually be a not inappropriate thing for me to get. I mean, people do sort of say, "What's your secret?" And only slightly sarcastically reply, "Stubbornness." Do you know what I mean? Like,
But isn't it amazing that you're now on album 10, you're headlining 2000 Trees, you're getting to play all over the world. You still got, I'm sure it's helped having a new drummer, but you've got the energy and the desire and the hunger that you had probably still 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's not like you're like, oh, I've got to do another album because I've got to pay the mortgage and I've got this legal
yeah.
bill. You're doing it because you want to do it.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate in that, and that's important to recognize. But it's funny that you put it that way because that is a thing. I know that there are bands, and everyone does things differently. But like, there are bands who are like book studio time and then kind of write songs when they're in the studio or whatever.
I
And
never get that. It feels like it's a waste of time. You're
I
spending money
mean,
for the
yeah.
sake
First of
of
all,
it.
how much fucking money have you got?
Yeah.
Like, but secondly, that just seems like, oh, it's time to do an album. We should probably do an album. Like, fuck that. Like, I write songs until I feel like there's enough material to create a body of
Yeah.
stuff and to justify spending money on being in a studio. So I do try and check in with myself that I'm doing this for good reasons. I'm not just making records because that's what I do, because I've got a mortgage to pay, because whatever. This is my job. This is how I
Yeah.
make my living. But it's like, ultimately, like, I could go out and do an anniversary tour of England Keep My Bones, let's say, and make a pretty decent living doing that at any given time. And I hope that I will choose to do that rather than just churn out a record as and when that moment arrives. Do you know what I mean? Like, and like, people may turn around and say, "Well, I think you are churning it out," and that's totally legit. But I guess what I'm saying is I try and check in with myself that I'm not just sort of making new records for the sake of it.
I think it's an amazing place where you can be supporting My Chemical Romance, then you can play 2000 Trees Festival, you can do your own show. I feel like you've got everything in place to do what you want to do. And I think that's really fucking awesome to have earned that right. Where if when you get announced as supporting My Chemical Romance, it's like, he's not fucking metal, he's not heavy enough. It's not that. It's people are like, yeah, fucking great. The atmosphere in Manchester when I saw you was unbelievable.
Yeah, that was a cool show, and like, kudos, Frank. I mean, all of the My Chem guys, but Frankie Arrow is just, he's, you just occasionally encounter people and they're like, good guy.
Yeah, one of the
Like,
good ones.
he's wearing a white hat in the film of this. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's going to heaven, however you want to put it. I mean, yeah, it's that is a thing, and there is some of my thinking about this kind of is in the record, but like, at a certain point, like, I'm aware that everything I'm about to say doesn't really matter in the broad scheme of things, but it does sort of matter in my life, and I'm the one talking, and you
Of
asked me on the
course.
podcast, so.
And I want to know.
But like, at a certain point, this is my 26th year as a touring musician, 20th anniversary of my solo show, album 10, all these, I'm into my stats, whatever, coming up on show 3000. And it's like, ultimately, that's not actually, it doesn't happen all the time. And it's not actually that easy to do. And like, I remember many years ago socially encountering somebody from a kind of, I mean, to make my point, now kind of totally forgotten indie band who are quite buzzy at the time, who just made some slightly snarky comment about me and what I do, not necessarily in a particularly vicious way, but just in a slightly kind of like taking the piss kind
Yeah.
of way. And it was like, motherfucker, if you're still playing Ali Pally fucking 15 years into your career, then let's have that conversation. But in the meantime, back in your fucking box, do you know what I mean? Because I know you just fucking headline Dingwalls or whatever and got
Yeah.
a fucking enemy. But like, trust me, I've seen so many people like you come and go. And that's me being defensive, but this long into album 10, it's you at a certain point you sort of become slightly inarguable. Like, people can say they don't like what I do, and they do sometimes, but it's kind of hard to argue that it's completely meritless in this juncture, because it's sort of self-evidently isn't. And you do sort of acquire this kind of weight, and this, I guess, a right to stand your ground. And like, I'm
You
sort of
wouldn't be where you
trying.
were. You wouldn't be here now on album 10 if you didn't deserve it, if you hadn't put the graft in, if people didn't like it. It's true. It's not blowing your own trumpet. It's rightfully so. You're doing
Yeah,
album
there's
number 10. You're doing
right.
it,
There's
you know.
just a little bit of kind of like sort of chest
Yeah,
out
you
that I'm
should.
allowed to do from time to time, and like, and that's not a sort of I was going to say a gesture. I don't know that comes to me all that naturally. Do you know what I mean? But like, it's kind of fun, like, hanging around backstage at festivals. I mean, one thing I will say. So last summer we did a 10 million sort of punk leaning festivals around Europe in the summer, and there is definitely like a new generation of punk bands around that between, and there is like clear blue water between me and them. And I think that's great in lots of different ways. I mean, first of all, because there's so many fucking great bands around right now, like Jen and the Degenerates, No Bro,
Great band.
Losers, OBGMs, Mannequin Pussy. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many fucking cool bands coming up right now. But also, like, it's a funny sort of role that I'm slightly adjusting to. But like, it's like, we were in Italy, and this kid from a grind band, I can't even remember their name, who's American, came over and was like, "My first ever gig was you, and my parents took me to see you in like 2011 or something." And I was like, "Oh, fucking A." And he was like, a big fan. Could you come and see my band? And I had nothing to do all day. I was like, "Yeah, yeah," and I was completely shocked to discover that they were a grind band for a start, and secondly, they were wildly popular. There was a place was rammed, and it was just like, oh. And then he wanted to have a selfie for his Instagram, and it was like, yeah, sure.
You need
Like,
to take those moments. They're
right,
important.
but it's kind of like, it's like, I don't want to be a fucking elder statesman museum piece or any of those kind of terms just yet. But then to go back to what we started talking about here, it's like, it's been 20 years, or more, since this has been going on. That's a long time. That's the distance between the first Beatles album and Ride the Lightning. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mind
that's time
blowing.
enough. So I think, I'm trying to. I guess what I'm saying is, and there is sort of parts of this in the new record. I'm sort of trying to find my way to sort of finding a comfortable role
Yeah.
within the context of everything that we're talking about.
One of my favorite bands of all time, and they stay deep in my heart, is Thrice. I think Dustin
Mm,
Kensrue is one of the best songwriters
yeah, yeah,
ever. Similar to you, he can go off and do his solo stuff and do all his stuff
sure,
acoustically, and it's beautiful. And then he can go on stage and sing really heavy stuff. But as you have, he's now with the rest of the band produced their own album, and they studio in their own studio and record everything and engineer it all. And I love the fact that you're now doing this on your own album. You haven't got a label telling you this chorus needs to be poppier, this needs to be more radio
sure.
friendly. Surely it must feel like absolute freedom now for you to basically sit and say, I'm releasing this song. Actually, I don't even want to release any songs. And if I do, I'm doing this one. And
Sure.
I want the snare to sound like this. I want the
Yeah.
guitar to sound like this. It must feel like a breath of fresh air.
It does. I mean, I think it's important to say that I ended up doing 5 records licensed to Universal, which was really surprising to me, because I thought we'd do one and I get told to piss off, which would have been fine.
Enough now, Frank.
Um,
Book off. Yeah.
yeah, do you know what I mean? And then actually I finished my deal, which apparently 5% of people who sign a major deal complete them. So happy days. But like, it's I don't want to say that I was, that I ended up putting out art that I won't stand behind. or anything like that, but I would have to expend a fair amount of energy kind of fighting,
Yeah,
picking and then fighting battles, and sometimes just sort of jumping up and down and waving my arms around to try and get someone's attention. You know what I mean? To make all that work, and so coming out the back end of that, yes, there's a fair degree of just like, oh, I can just do what I want. But also, I mean, the production thing, like my lockdown project was to learn how to kind of be a producer, and I've been sort of working with other bands for a few years, and it's important to say actually that was quite a big influence on the way the album sounds, because there's a certain point in every rock, well, there seems to be a point in the rock musician's career when you buy a leather jacket and start complaining about how rock music has died, and it's just like, oh, fuck off. And like working with kind of newer, younger bands in my studio is really reinvigorating because they're full of piss and vinegar. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? And that's really, I think, rubbed off on me. And we just got to a point. I also demo in a lot more depth these days, and we reached a point where I was just like, why am I going to pay somebody like a ton of money to sit in the corner and applaud me when I get it right? Do you know what I mean? It's like I fucking know, and I sort of effectively play the role of arranger or musical director with my band. That's not incidentally to belittle their contributions at all. They're all integral to the sound, brilliant players, blah blah blah. But like, I'm sort of the MD anyway, and it's
yeah,
just kind of like I didn't mix the record, which I think is important.
of course.
To get a sort of a sense of distance and a more skilled mixer in on the job. But like I had a good time producing.
I love it, man. I think it'd be too hard to mix. I think you'd turn yourself insane. I think it'd be like that
Yeah,
artist
quite
who can never
quite
do the
possibly.
last final stroke on their picture. You'd be like, I can't leave it, I can't leave it. And they'd be
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Frank, it's
So,
been 19 years since you've released
well, maybe
Undefeated. It's never came out, you know.
that's the next record, huh? By the way, I hate to do this. I do have another interview coming in
Yes,
in
I'll
a
ask two
minute.
more. I got one final question.
Yeah, yeah, far away.
What I do on this podcast is I ask every artist that comes on to pick the final song that's played. It can be any song, any band, any piece of music in the whole world. But as this is all edited, one song gets to play. You've probably got a million in your head. I know we're restricted for
Yeah.
time, but what's a
I
song that
mean,
you love?
uh, where to begin?
I know I'm putting you on the spot. Most bands are like,
uh,
"Fuck you," but I'm like,
I mean, I'm tempted to be egocentric and say the last track on Undefeated, which is called Undefeated, which is it's not a swan song per se, but
in
it's a nice record.
330 episodes, only one person's chose their own music.
Is that what before me, or is that me?
That's before you, but from
Okay,
the
right.
U's,
Well,
that
I
was
said
it.
tempted. I said tempted.
Yes,
I didn't say I'm actually doing it. I'm in full disclosure. I'm reaching that point in a man's life where I sort of quite often listen to My Way late at night while swilling at
beautiful.
liquor and weeping. Um,
That's gonna be
which is
fucking epic for the end of this.
yeah, yeah. Fuck it, let's choose that then. Yeah, My Way.
Yeah,
There. I mean, it is genuinely. It's one of those songs that's so overdone and it's so cliched and it's so easy to hang kind of sort of jokey stereotypes around it. But if you actually just fucking sit down and
yeah.
listen to that as a piece of music, it is still there is a reason it's become a cultural stereotype, which is that it is powerful enough to sustain that level of attention.
Amazing. I'll let you go now, but I want to record again when we've got more time because I feel like we could
I
talk
would
for
enjoy that.
hours.
I feel like we'd scratched the surface today.
Exactly. But thank you for everything. Good luck with the album, and I'll drop you an email later.
Thanks, man. Take
Thank you.
care.
See you later.
See you later.
Bye bye.